A very good morning to all of you. So, we are here with our discussion on the public administration second paper of the test series. Just going back a few days, that is last week itself, we took up a discussion on the very first paper of the test series. And today, like in the last session itself, we will be taking up a few questions for this discussion. We will no we will take up some important questions, some questions which are analytical, some questions which I according to me is no it may be a bit difficult for you in order to structure or answer them. I will be taking up that particular discussion so that you are able to, so you are better in a position when you're writing your, your answers. You are better in a position to deal with such questions. This particular session will also include some feedback related to the mistakes that I have observed in when I was correcting some of your answer scripts. So I did see you were no you were making some mistakes repeatedly. In the last session also I had addressed some of these mistakes. Today also we will be talking about them. Okay. Anyways, let's begin. What I have planned for today is that what I have planned is that I will include no I will include most of the questions that are there. That means the topics here, if you look at the second paper that is there, so the topic that we have included here is the topics of comparative public administration, development administration, personnel administration, uh, public policy, and techniques of administrative improvement, financial administration. These are the topics which are a part of the second paper. That is, if you look at the second half of paper 1, the first half of paper 1 is what we know what we had as a syllabus of the very first test. This is the second half of the first paper. Okay. I will be writing down some questions also. Obviously, there may be a problem related to visibility here. So what I'll do is I will write down the questions that I am going to discuss here. Okay. So the first question that I have to discuss is the very first question, that is question number 1A, which is comparative public administration has shifted from searching from. What is the question? The question is comparative public administration shifted from searching of universal principles universal principles searching for universal principles to understand administrative diversity, to understand to understand administrative administrative diversity. Examine. Okay. This is the question that is there. Question number 1, first question, that is A, a 10 marker. Okay. CPA has shifted from what? CPA has shifted from searching of universal principles to understanding of administrative diversity. Now, if you look at this particular question, This is a very straightforward question. It is a very straightforward question. There is nothing technical about it. If you have an understanding of what comparative public administration stands for, what is the what is the basic idea in comparative public administration, you will be able to you will be able to answer this question. There is no problem related to content of it. So more importantly, specifically when it comes to 10 markers and 15 markers, what becomes of absolute importance is that how you are going to structure questions, because you have limited number of words and you have to you have to use that use that limited number of words very 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 judiciously. Okay, so you cannot waste, like in 20 markers you have enough number of words to write, but that is not the case when it comes to 10 markers and 15 markers. So in this case it is so important that we understand what exactly the question demands and accordingly put our content, we present our content in such a manner that there is there is absolutely no problem related to that part. Okay, so in this particular question, the introduction of this question that is there, as you can see, shifted from searching of universal principles. So we have to do what? We have to address this universal principles concept. We have to address this universal principles concept in the introduction itself. So in this case, when we talk about universal principles, which school of thought in public administration has emphasized on the presence of some universal principles of administration? Yes, you will tell me this. You will tell me this. Which which universal principle, which school of thought has emphasized on this very concept of universal principles? Which school of thought? Of course, it is the classical principles, or the classical, or no, even when it comes to classical, we call them as general administrative theories. Yes, GAT, general administrative theories. Okay, so that classical theorist, within the classical theorist, the GAT, that is the general administrative theorist, has emphasized on it. So you will write about the classical general administrative theorists, emphasizing on the universal principles of administration. You will, in this, here itself, you are going to explain what exactly is meant by the concept of universal principles, where the belief of the principles, the belief that there are some principles, belief that there are some principles there are some principles of administration, there are some principles of administration, and these principles apply to all kinds of organizations, apply to all kinds of organizations, apply to all organizations, irrespective of its operations, irrespective of its operations or origin. That means whether such principles, that are there, whether such principles are being applied to a public organization, a private organization, a non-governmental organization, whether it is being applied to a service related organization, a manufacturing related organization, any organization it may be, but these principles are relevant to all kinds of organizations. Okay, and you will, when you have explained this in the introduction, you will write one more sentence, which is what, which is you will emphasize that how they, this idea that they had prescribed for, this idea was a culture specific concept. It was a culture specific concept. Culture specific, that means whatever, whatever observations related to these principles that were done, it was done in a very specific kind of a culture. It was done in a very specific kind of a culture, and it was universalized. That means here the classical theorists failed to adopt a culture specific approach, a culture sensitive approach, or as F.W. Riggs says, they adopted what Riggs called as the ideographic approach and not the nomothetic approach. Okay, so you will in one line adopt, you will talk about that ideographic versus nomothetic idea versus nomothetic. Okay, this is basically what your introduction is supposed to be. Okay, देखो, you have to be very clear when you are explaining the concept of universal principles, because what the main content of the answer is, it is related to comparative public administration, and comparative public administration emphasizing on administrative diversity. But you cannot, you cannot properly explain this concept until and unless you have explained what traditional public administration, what mistake traditional public administration has made, where they have forwarded this universal principles, but they have failed to do what? They have failed to accept, adopt diversity as that very idea. Okay, that is something which you have to emphasize here itself. And then comes the body part of your answer. Okay, then comes the body part of your answer. Now, in the body part of your answer, you are supposed to write about comparative public administration. Okay, so what aspect of comparative public administration would you write here? Tell me. How would you introduce this very concept here? Tell me. How are you going to introduce this very concept here? How are you going to introduce this? How are you going to introduce comparative public administration, which is the most important aspect, the body part of your answer? How are you going to introduce this? Okay. See, what you are supposed to write here is that comparative public administration adopted a very important approach called the ecological approach. So you are going to do what? You are going to emphasize on the ecological approach. You are going to emphasize on the ecological approach. And that is basically the idea here, because the whole question is about the very concept of ecological approach. It has not been mentioned directly, लेकिन अगर आप क्वेश्चन को बहुत ध्यान से पढ़ते हो, then you will understand that the question basically demands that very ecological orientation that is there, है ना? Now, no, you are some of you have mentioned Wilson, or for that matter comparison that Wilson took up related to US and Europe, that is Western European countries. He made a comparative analysis between the administrative structures of these two countries. But the thing is that this is a 10 marker. So do you have the luxury to write these things in your answer, is a question here. Yes, you can maybe introduce the idea that comparative public administration was for the very first time talked about, or comparative analysis was for the very first time talked about by whom? It was for the very first time talked about by Woodrow Wilson. That is something that you can mention, but you cannot go into each and every aspect of Wilson's idea here, because you have to explain the ecological approach here. Now, what and how do you write about the ecological approach? You can, while explaining this, draw a diagram. Draw a diagram to explain what the ecological approach is. And what does the ecological approach assumes? The ecological approach assumes that administration is embedded in an environment. It is what? It is embedded in an environment or an ecology. It is embedded in an environment or an ecology, and that ecology consists of the politics, the society, the economy, the technological dimensions of the environment. And there is a regular, no, there, that means the ecological approach, by drawing this diagram, what are you trying to clarify? First thing, the ecological approach believes in what? Ecological approach believes that administration is embedded. It is embedded in an ecology. So it is a part of the ecology and does not function in a it does not function in a vacuum. Okay, this is what the ecological approach is trying to clarify. It does not function in a vacuum. It is very much a part of the ecology, and it is therefore influenced by its ecology. It is therefore what? Therefore, it is influenced. Therefore, it is influenced by its ecology. Therefore, what is there? Therefore, it is influenced by its ecology. Okay. At the same time, you will also mention why universal principle does not work. Universal principle does not work because the ecology of administration differs from country to country. Every ecology is different. and therefore principles which are applicable to one ecology may not be similarly, it may not be similarly applicable is different, and therefore and therefore principles cannot be effectively applied to every ecology. It cannot be effectively applied to what? It cannot be effectively applied to every ecology. You will write this particular part. Okay. And at the same time, see, it's a 10 marker. You cannot no, you cannot no overemphasize on any concept. But if you are presenting this diagram, mentioning these 3 points, you have done what? You have explained the concept of what? Look at the question. Understanding administrative diversity. Meaning every administration is different, diverse. है ना? And you have explained this by presentation of the ecological approach. You can maybe drop the names of F.W. Riggs, and how Riggs forwarded the ecological approach. Riggs adopted the ecological approach while he was giving his theory. You can just drop his name. If you have dropped the name of Wilson, along with Wilson's name, you can also drop the name of F.W. Riggs, and then come to the conclusion part of it. Okay. And what would be the conclusion that you write? See, after writing this much in the body, you will not have what? You will not have enough room to add something here. You will not have enough room. But how are you supposed to, what are you supposed to do in the conclusion part? Write about the criticism, primary criticism of CPA. What was the primary criticism of CPA? Yes. Anyone who can tell me what was the primary criticism of CPA? What was the primary criticism of CPA? See, it's not like if you are writing more, the names of more number of thinkers, so you will get more marks. No, that's not the case. But you should always relate, if it is a concept related to theory, if it is a concept which is where number of thinkers have come up with their views, you should present the views of these thinkers. The primary problem was they wanted to do what? They wanted to come up with remember the self defeating purpose. What was the self defeating purpose? The self defeating purpose, was that they wanted to adopt a theory which was a grand theory. Okay, so you will write about the fact that CPA had a self defeating objective, which was to adopt a grand theory which was in contradiction to the ecological approach which they had assumed. That is something which you write in the conclusion part. Okay, and this is basically how you address this particular question. Yes, any doubts if you have, you can go ahead, you can ask me about those doubts before we move on. Before we move to the next question, as you can see, we have addressed this particular question. Now, because I have already talked about one question from comparative public administration. So I will try and avoid any more questions from comparative public administration. We will try and deal with all the topics that are there. So let us take another question. The question is what? The question is related to development administration, and there is a question: development administration has evolved from state centric approach to governance centric approach. Okay. Development administration. What is the question? The question is development administration has evolved from a state centric approach to governance governance centric approach. State centric approach to governance centric approach. Discuss. Okay. Another 10 marker that is there. So how do we address this question? Now, what according to you is the basis, the main important point which is actually being asked here? If you look at this question, if you read this question, what comes to your mind? When I was reading some of your answer scripts for those who had written the test series, what I saw was that you, rather than writing about development administration, in this question, most of you have mentioned the evolution of public administration and how public administration evolved from the dichotomy idea to the governance concept. You have mentioned that, and that is not the correct answer. Okay, that is not the correct answer. You are not supposed to write that. Here the question is primarily related to the it is something which is primarily related to the models of development administration. Okay, and in the models of development administration, you can, in this question, write about two models. Obviously it's a 10 marker, so you don't have you don't have the room to write a lot of models here. What you can do is you can emphasize primarily on two models. What are those? The models of the modernization model, that is there, the first model, the modernization model, and how there has been a movement from modernization model to the reinventing model. Reinventing model. This is basically the crux of this particular question, है ना? This is the crux of this question. You are not supposed to no, you're not supposed to just write the evolution of public administration. Here it's about the development. The key point in question is development administration. It does not talk about evolution of public administration. It talks about development administration. And here in the introduction part, of the question, what are you going to write? In the introduction part of the question, you are going to write the background in which development administration emerges. Okay, the background in which development administration emerges. The background in which development administration emerges. And what was the background? The background was that post the Second World War, post the Second World War, and the emergence of newly independent countries, newly independent countries post the Second World War, and the emergence of newly independent countries, what factor was being emphasized on, what factors was being emphasized on? The factor of development, the factor of development. Okay, this is the background, and this is basically what you are going to write in the introduction part of it. Okay, and then comes the body part of your answer, and the body part of your answer would first be an elaboration of the first model of development administration, first model, which was the model of what? The model of modernization. It was the modernization model. This was the very first model, the modernization model. And in this particular model, the emphasis was placed on role of the state. है ना? ये भी ध्यान रखना है क्या? ये भी ध्यान रखना है कि you have to see what the question is. Don't start writing everything that is there in the modernization model. है ना? You're not supposed to just keep on writing whatever is there, whatever we have read in the modernization model. आप वो सारी चीजें नहीं लिख सकते हो. It's a 10 marker. You have to emphasize on, first of all, what the modernization model was about. Maybe 2 or 3 sentences on what the modernization model was about, and you will have to emphasize that the most important player according to the modernization model was what? Who was the most important player according to the modernization model? The modernization model, no, the modernization model, according to the no, according to the modernization model, the most important player, the most important role was played by the bureaucratic institutions. That means the state. Okay. So the most important role was to be played by the bureaucratic institutions. Okay. The state had the most important role to play here. And then things shifted. There was, in development administration, there was an understanding that the state does not necessarily have the capacity to deliver development, and there was a shift from the state towards what? There was a shift from the state centric to the governance approach. And the governance approach was what? The governance approach was, no, it started with the reinventing model, which emphasized on the role of private sector, role of private sector, and later on, emphasis was placed on on the role of civil society organizations and the private sector, along with bureaucratic organizations. That means now development. How was development administration to be taken up? How was development administration to be taken up? Development administration was to be taken up by state along with the private sector with the involvement of civil society organizations, and this is what the governance approach is. This is what the governance approach is. ठीक है? You will write about that. देखो, modernization model is not the re-engineering model. आप no, you cannot correlate that. You are supposed to have, you are supposed to have by this particular time, when you're writing tests, when you have completed your syllabus, now your objective should be primarily on answer writing. Content part should be over by now. ठीक है? For those, for those who are, no, for those who are, no, if you are targeting the 2027 mains examination, so in 2027 by 2027 mains examination, the content part should be over by now. If you have gone through the syllabus, all these things have been done, content part should be over by now. Okay? And now what you should be emphasizing on is not the content, but how you write answers, how you work on आंसर राइटिंग. दैट इज व्हाट यू नीड टू एम्फसाइज ऑन. इस चीज को आपको याद रखना है. ठीक है? एंड देन कम्स द कंक्लूजन पार्ट. So in the conclusion part, you are supposed to do what? You are supposed to analyze this shift, which was from state centric. So what was state centric model about? State centric model was an exclusive model. That is a non-participatory model. A non-democratic model. A non-democratic model. And a shift to governance approach. And what is the governance approach? Exactly opposite. An inclusive model. It's an inclusive, participatory, democratic model that is there. It is basically a part of that. Okay? It is inclusive, it is participatory, and it is democratic model. This is basically what you are supposed to write here. This is basically what you are supposed to write. Okay? ये है आपका the next 10 marker that is there. ठीक है? Let us come to the next question. Now, let's take up a question related to anti-development thesis. Okay? Anti-development thesis is what? Anti-development thesis is basically again something that is related to development administration, but it's a different topic. So let's take up a question related to that. Examine the main arguments of anti-development thesis. Do they undermine the concept of development administration? Okay. Main arguments. What is the question? Examine the main arguments of anti-development what are the main arguments of anti-development thesis? Do they undermine the concept of development administration? Do they undermine the concept of development administration? ठीक है, this is basically what this particular question demands. So let us look at this particular question. ठीक है, examine the main arguments of anti-development thesis. So in the introduction itself, you are supposed to do what? You are supposed to write about the background of anti-development thesis. You are supposed to do what? You are supposed to write the backgrounds of anti-development thesis. ठीक है? Now, what was the background of anti-development thesis? If you remember, here you can drop the name of A.G. Frank. A.G. Frank. And A.G. Frank being one of the most initial thinkers who emphasized on what? Who had emphasized on the concept of problems which development as a concept brought. Okay, and he gave what? He gave a he gave a specific analogy where he provided for something called as satellite versus metropolis concept. Okay, so that very background of what A.G. Frank looked at, how his perspective of development was, and how he believed that development was what? How he believed that development was an exploitative concept. How development was what? How development was an exploitative concept. How he believed that development does what? Development creates, or no, the development model that is there, what it does is it creates a dependency. It creates a dependency of developing countries over developed countries and how developed countries they develop at the cost of developing countries. How developed countries develop at the cost of the developing countries. In very brief, no, you are supposed to do what? You are supposed to drop the name of A.G. Frank, but you are supposed to be here very brief. You cannot write everything that we had discussed as to what AG Frank has to say, because it's a 10 marker. So at most you can write a 30 to 40 word introduction, okay, not more than that. And then in the body part of your answer, what are you supposed to do? In the body part of your answer, you are supposed to write about, as the question demands, what does anti-development thesis advocate? Clear? So here you are going to, no, you are going to write under two subheadings, two important subheadings. What? Anti-development thesis and its criticism. What has anti-development thesis criticized modernization approach on? है ना? It has criticized modernization approach to be exploitative, reductionist, not authentic, exogenic. It has criticized. No, it has criticized the modernization approach on these grounds. Because it's a 10 marker, so you cannot write everything. Just in points, write exploitative, explain, write exploitative, write the next point, reductionist, explain. Maybe just one sentence each to explain these points. And then the next part of the body would be where you would write what does the anti-development thesis advocates. What does it advocates? And here you will have to write it advocates for authentic development. It advocates for inclusive development. Authentic development, it advocates inclusive development. You will write about that. Okay. Authentic development, inclusive development, the meaning of it, you'll write that. Okay. Now, coming to the last part of the question, which you will address in the last part of your answer, does it undermine the concept of development administration? What would be your answer? Can you write this in a yes or no answer? That does anti-development thesis undermine? Does it undermine does it undermine the concept of development administration? What do you think? What is your answer here? Yes, who will explain this? Batao mujhe. What do you think is the answer here? Anyone? Does it undermine the concept of development? Yes, because the advocates, the scholars of anti-development thesis talk about going to the era which predates development. Going to the era which predates development. They have talked about how some very important statements could be quoted, how we should not be worried about failure of development, but rather its success. How the advocates of anti-development thesis say that development and underdevelopment are the two sides of the same coin, and one happens at the cost of the other. So if there is development, it is because of underdevelopment. So development for some, but underdevelopment for the rest. And then, by writing maybe 2 or 3 sentences here, you will also conclude your answer by criticizing that the scholars of anti-development thesis ignored the benefits of development administration and were not able to provide a feasible alternative to development administration. This is your conclusion. This is going to be your conclusion. Is it clear? Okay. This is how you how you approach this. Now, this is so many things, but you have to write it in 150, 175, 80 words, not more than that. Okay. Moving on. Okay. So anti-development thesis, we have already seen that. Okay. So these questions are the question number A. It is a part of question number A. We have discussed some of these questions. Let's move on and let us discuss let us discuss 20 markers and 15 markers. Let's take up some 20 markers and 15 markers for discussion. Okay. First question is again related to development administration. So let us ignore that aspect. Come to this question. This is an important question. A 20 marker. Critically evaluate the personnel administration reforms required to build a citizen centric, accountable and a future ready civil services in India. Let us talk about this particular question. Critically evaluate the personnel administration reforms. Critically evaluate the personnel administration reforms required to build a citizen centric required to build a citizen centric, accountable and future ready future ready future ready civil services in India. Future ready civil services in India. Future ready civil services in India. Okay. So this is the question that is there. Now, this is a question which requires more than classroom discussion. ठीक है, यानी हमने क्लासरूम में we have discussed and we any discussion related to personal administration, we do talk about the no the recruitment, how recruitment needs to be done, then promotion, training, and so on. We do talk about it. Okay. Now this question is a 20 marker asking you to evaluate personal administration reforms required to be taken. How? No, what needs to be done, and you need to critically evaluate. That means you need to first of all provide what is the problems as of today, and what could be the initiatives or steps taken in the future to make civil services in India future ready. Okay. So here, what would be, what would be the introduction here? Introduction is to be about the role of an efficient and effective civil services. Civil services in contemporary administration. In contemporary administration. What are you supposed to do here? In the introduction itself, देखो, this is a question which has multiple dimensions. Okay. And this is a question, as as I've told you, this is something where you have to go beyond what is the classroom discussion. आपको कंटेम्प्ररी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन कैसा है वो पता होना चाहिए, एंड व्हाट इज द प्रॉब्लम विद दैट फॉर्म ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, दैट काइंड ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, वो भी आपको पता होना चाहिए. एंड ओनली देन यू विल बी एबल टू राइट दिस आंसर. ठीक है. इसीलिए फ्रेमिंग, किस तरह से मैं इस आंसर को फ्रेम कर रहा हूं, इस पर बहुत ज्यादा ध्यान देना है. ऑल ऑफ यू नीड टू एम्फसाइज ऑन इट, बिकॉज when I was reading the answer scripts that are there, when I was reading your answer scripts, I found that most of you are just writing whatever is discussed in the classroom. Most of you are writing that okay, what is the problem with training? That is fine. What is the problem with the recruitment process? That is fine. That is a part of the discussion, but it is not what is the sufficient aspect of this particular discussion. Okay. So framing of this particular no, this question becomes very, very, very important. Okay. So how are you supposed to do? So today we are talking about an administration which is working in this era, and what is the, what are the specific significant significant features of this particular era. First we have to start our discussion from that particular point. Okay. So significant features of this era is we live in a tech enabled era, है ना. That is, technology plays a very important role here. Clear. Governance in contemporary era is very complex. Governance in contemporary era is very complex, and complexity meaning what civil services require is domain specialization to address this complexity. What is required? Domain specialization. Domain specialization. Domain specialization meaning a generalist civil services does not work anymore. You need to do what? You need to bring about specialization. You need to bring about more and more specialization. Clear? Similarly, this is also an era of accountability in administration. accountability in administration. Okay, this is also an era of accountability. That means administration today is not anymore the administration of the 1960s or the 1970s. Today, administration has to be more accountable, and therefore, there are some changes to be made there as well. At the same time, there has to be an administration which is more performance centric. Okay, more performance centric. This is what are the few requirements of contemporary administration. Today we live in an era of technology, and therefore tech enabled complexity of governance is there. Accountability, there is a demand for administrative accountability, and at the same time there is a need for efficiency. है ना? There is also a need for what? There is a need for an efficient administration and efficient administration. So whatever you are supposed to write in the body part, है ना? Whatever you are going to write in the body part of your answer, the body part of your answer should stem from the introduction itself. There should be a correlation there, है ना? There should be a correlation. Okay. Can you write features of good governance? Not all, but some of them you can write here. Like we have talked about accountability, we have talked about efficiency, है ना? These things are the features of good governance. You can write some of the features of good governance. That is absolutely correct. But don't make the answer good governance specific. Your answer is civil services. What is the requirement of civil services? So your presentation needs to be accordingly. Okay. Then comes the body part of your answer. So in the body part of your answer, we are supposed to do what? We are supposed to reiterate whatever we have written in the introduction, and we are supposed to do what? We are supposed to write about that. So in the introduction, we have written about complexity of governance. Okay. So how is complexity of governance? What is this analysis of the complexity of governance? So today what we see, because it says critically evaluate, so we have to write what is the problem today, and then we have to write what is the solution. We have to write what is the solution. Okay. Complexity of governance. The problems of administration today are highly complex. They are not anymore simple. So there is a need for what? There is a need for specialization. What we see here in administration as of today is that in Indian administration, still we follow generalism or generalist administrators are still being emphasized over specialization, okay, because the problems are complex. So a generalist administrator cannot deal with those problems. A generalist administrators can do what? A generalist administrator cannot deal with those problems. There is a need to do what? There is a need to introduce more specialization. Okay. What is the problem? The problem is still we have still emphasized, we still give more importance to generalist administrators over specialization. Clear? What can be done? What can be done is you can write about solution. You can give the recommendation of second administrative reforms commission. and how Second Administrative Reforms Commission advocated for domain specialization. They have advocated domain specialization. And you can also write about what we have done here. We have introduced Mission Karm Yogi. Mission Karm Yogi. We have introduced Mission Karm Yogi, and how this mission aims to bring what? It aims to bring domain specialization. Okay? It aims to bring domain specialization. Okay? Then you can write about training. You can do what? You can emphasize on the training part. How? Or if you are not writing training here, it would work. You can emphasize on training in this part, that is performance centric. So rather than writing it here, we can do what? We can write in the second point, which is performance oriented bureaucracy or performance oriented civil services. Performance oriented civil services is what is required. What is the problem here? The problem is, first of all, we have to emphasize on training. And what is the problem that we observe related to training? The problem that we observe related to training is either there is a lack of it, or the objectives of training. The objectives of training that is there, the objectives of training are not, no, they are not necessarily to bring about better and more efficient administration. It's more of a general training program. Okay, so in training you will write about the problems here without getting into more details, because there are so many things to be written. So what you will do is you will emphasize on lack of training, more importantly on the objectives of training. What is the objectives of training? That is what you have to emphasize on. क्योंकि जनरली हम ये देखते हैं कि जो सिविल सर्वेंट्स हैं, they look at training as a paid holiday. Training is not looked as an training is not looked as an activity to enhance skills or enhance worldview. There is a problem related to what? There is a problem related to training and your organization, because training is not related to personnel administration. So if someone is more trained, he should be given better opportunities and more relevant work, which is which is correlated to the training. But that's not what we see. So you will emphasize on it, and then you will write the solution part. You will write about what can be done related to training. You can write about the need for incorporating more practical dimensions of training, adopting best practices, making a correlation between training and personnel administration. You will mention this part. Okay, देखो, it is primarily about what? देखो, I am just using my knowledge that I have gained from classroom discussion. ऐसा नहीं है कि क्लासरूम डिस्कशन में हमने इन चीजों को पढ़ा नहीं है, लेकिन किस तरह से आंसर में प्लेस करना है वो जरूरी है. ओके, नाउ नेक्स्ट, इन परफॉर्मेंस there is another problem which is performance appraisal. Performance appraisal, that is also a problem. Why? What are the problems? The problems related to it, you can write about how the annual performance report APR, sorry, annual performance report is the way that we right now take a performance appraisal. Then you can also write about again a lack of correlation between performance appraisal and personnel administration. You can write about that. You can write about certain solutions which we have discussed. You can talk about 360-degree appraisal that is required. 360-degree appraisal is required. Then comes accountability. Accountability, the third point, is a more accountable administration. In the accountability part, you can write what is the problem. The problem is that primarily accountability is hierarchical, and there is a lack of social accountability. Social accountability, that is accountability to the people. And what can be the solution for it? You can write about solution. Solution could be in the form of institutionalization of measures of social accountability. Okay, that could be, just a moment. Okay, social accountability, we can do what? We can write about social accountability. That is something that can be mentioned here. Okay, so accountability, that is something that is there related to accountability. Complexity, we have talked about. Performance oriented, we have talked about accountability, performance centric. Tech enabled, again a part of training, you can add some points there as well. Okay, so you are talking about the problems, you are also providing what solutions is there. Okay, now how can you conclude this answer? So the conclusion of this answer could be written in the form of suggestions, certain commissions, and the recommendations of those committee commissions can be made a part of your conclusion. Okay, that is how you can end this particular answer. Okay, देखो, what is required in the answer needs to come from the knowledge that we have, but there is a need to structure that knowledge. There is a need to do what? There is a need to structure that knowledge. You cannot always think of doing what simply whatever the way we have read everything in the classroom can be written accordingly. No, that is not something which is required. No, it is not relevant also. If you do that, it would not be relevant. That is not how you can, no, that is not how you can continue writing answers. You have to shape your knowledge in accordance to what the question demands. Sometimes you have to be very innovative, because not every question you will know direct answers to. So you have to use whatever you have studied in order to address it. Clear? That is what is required. Anyways, let's move on. Let us move on. Section A we have talked about. Let's look at some questions from section B as well. Major criticisms of comparative public administration: has the discipline lost its relevance? The answer of it is easy. We have talked about criticisms of comparative public administration, how there was a problem related to the CPA, because CPA wanted to achieve a grand theory. Okay, that was a problem. How it had self-defeating purpose, that was a problem. Okay, those things you will mention here. And has the discipline lost its relevance? No. Why? Because in the era of LPG, comparative public administration has become more relevant. You will write that. You will write about how, because there is a era of globalization, there is interdependence of countries in the era of no globalization, and how comparative studies could be solution to the problems that are no that the administration of any country is facing, looking at what can be done, looking at what initiatives other countries are taking and adopting them. You can give examples related to common problems, whether it is climate change, whether it is problems like issues of terrorism, whether it is disaster management. All these things are what? These are common problems. And how comparative public administration becomes of utmost importance here. This is how you can write this, approach this. Discuss significance of Riggs prismatic Sala model in understanding of developing societies. So FW Riggs, we have no all of us whoever we have read public administration, we know no the scholar FW Riggs. We know how FW Riggs has made some very major, very important contributions. They have made some. He has made some very important contributions. So we are supposed to write what? We are supposed to write what contributions he has made. So the very first thing is that because Riggs talks about comparative, his contributions comes in comparative public administration. So in comparative public administration, there are some things that he has emphasized on. Like he has talked about, he has made public administration, if you remember, non-ecological to ecological. So you will write that. No, you will emphasize on that. Second point, he has he has made public administration move from ideographic to nomothetic, that is culture specific to cross cultural. You will write about that as well. You will also write about the fact that he has done what? He has used something called as the structural functional approach to analysis. You will emphasize on that. And then you will relate it to his theory, how he has talked about prismatic societies being different from fused societies or from diffracted societies. You will correlate that aspect. Okay. There is a question, see, public policy process is nothing more than disjointed incrementalism. Nothing more than disjointed incrementalism. Public policy process is nothing more than disjointed incrementalism. Okay, this is the question, and you will find that this is a question which has been repeatedly asked in your UPSC examination. So here, which model of policy making is being emphasized on? The model is incrementalism. Okay, so this particular question demands you write about the incrementalism model. Okay, and for those who have not studied the incrementalism model, this is a very important model of policy making. You can no, you are supposed to read about it. If you read if you read Mohit Bhattacharya, you will find that there is a mention of the incrementalism model in under the models. Here, incrementalism model has been presented by an individual called Charles Lindblom. Okay, so Lindblom has written a book called as The Science of Muddling Through. The Science of Muddling Through. And in this he had presented the incrementalism model. Now, what is the incrementalism model? So, after mentioning this, now you will come to explaining what incrementalism is. And you will explain that incrementalism is where there is a decision tree. There is what? There is a decision tree. What is this decision tree about? And this decision tree is what Charles Lindblom believes how policy making is done. He believes that policies are not the result of analysis, data, and finally to resolve the data, the policies are resolve the problem. The looking at what the data says, understanding the problem, and accordingly policies are initiated. No. Charles Lindblom believes that every policy decision is an incremental decision over the last policy. It's an incremental decision over the last policy. Over the last policy. You can see what is happening. What is happening is that there was first a policy taken. Now the next policy is just an increment over it, and so on. And this is what it means. It is just an increment. That means the same policy with some slight changes. Are termed, renamed, and brought as new policies. Clear? So what incrementalism believes is that policy decisions are not mostly the policies that are policy decisions are taken. These are not decisions where everything is done from scratch. No, that is not what happens. Rather, what happens is that most of the times policy decisions are just an incremental approach over the last policies. Okay, it's just an increment over the last policies. Clear? So this is basically what incrementalism is. You will write about incrementalism in the body part of your answer. You will describe what was Charles Lindblom's ideas. You will write about that. Okay. Now, after you have described what incrementalism is, the question demands that you explain what is disjointed incrementalism. Okay. Now, this concept, now we will come to this question, no, in the body part of your answer, after I have explained incrementalism, then we come to the next part, that is the second part, where I explain disjointed incrementalism. So what is disjointed incrementalism? Now this term that is there, disjointed incrementalism, it is a paradox. It is what? It is a paradox. It is a paradox. देखो ये जो theory है of Charles Lindblom, you will read this theory in two places in your syllabus. One is the policies, public policy, and the models of public policy. There you will read incrementalism, and you will also read incrementalism as the third topic, which is administrative behavior, and there you have decision making. So decision making and policy making, the theories of decision making and public policy overlap. Okay, and that is also where you basically read about it. Okay. Now it is a paradox. Why it is a paradox? No, why it is a paradox? It is a paradox because the term disjointed is never a term which we associate with incrementalism. फिर से समझो, अगर पॉलिसीज इस तरह से बनाई जा रही हैं, where there is a policy that has been first taken up and the next policy is just an increment over the last policy. It is just an increment over the last policy, and then comes the third policy being an increment over the last policy. So how can that be disjointed? है ना, ये तो jointed होंगे, disjointed तो नहीं होंगे. And that is the reason why I have mentioned it, that it is a paradox. It is not something which is generally true. It is a paradox. ये दोनों एक दूसरे से opposite है, लेकिन फिर भी Lindblom does talk about disjointed incrementalism. Why? Because he believes that when a policy is regularly an increment over the last policy, there is always a possibility. There is always a possibility of despite an incremental approach, a policy loses its touch or connect to the objectives, to the values of the last policy. There is always a specific issue. What is it? The issue is that despite the new policy being an incremental policy, but because there are changes, so these changes could be of such nature that the new policy loses its connect to the values, to the objectives of the last policy, and therefore the first policy and the second policy becomes disjointed. They are no more, no, they are no more connected, they are no more jointed, they are disjointed. And what is the problem with this? The problem with this is that the efforts and the achievements that were made by the first policy will not spill over into the second policy because they are disconnected, they are disjointed. Okay, that is what disjointed incrementalism means. You will write this as a part of, no, you will write this as a part of the body of your answer. Okay, you will write this and then you will conclude the answer. And what will be the conclusion of this 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 answer? Because it's about incrementalism, you can write about the approach being, how this approach is something which is quite visible in the policy making of different governments, where we find that the new policy is just a change of name, or some minimal changes are made and a new policy is adopted, but the policy seems to just be an increment over the last policy. This is something which you can mention and conclude your answer. Okay, this is basically what it is. Okay, so you can see these are some important questions. I have talked about some important questions which I felt is a more evaluative type of question, and no, mostly I have tried to cover no, the some topics that are there. Financial administration, there was a topic of financial administration as well, but financial administration, most of the questions were not that difficult, so I did not take up those questions for discussion in this very session. Okay, I hope that this session is helpful for you. Next week we will conduct one more session in which the third paper that was that was conducted, we will take up a discussion on the third paper. Now we are into paper 2, so we will be discussing a third paper, paper 2, and in between, if I feel the need, I will take up small topics which I find, if I find that these topics are important and you need revision for it, or you have you need, some of you need a value addition to your notes, etc. So I will take up that discussion. Those sessions would be conducted on YouTube. Okay, that is it for our discussion for today. We'll meet next week with a new paper, discussion of new paper. By the time, for those who have written the test, I hope this discussion was helpful for them. For those who have not written the test but you are right now in the process of answer writing, the way we approach structuring of our answers, I hope that that part is something which is that discussion of that part is something which is helpful for you. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you everyone. We'll meet in the next session. Please revise, please add value to this. Whatever discussions we are having, I hope this adds value to your preparation. Thank you.